The moment you stop chasing her, something begins. And it's almost certainly not what you think. Most men assume the story ends there. You pull back, the energy shifts, and whatever was building between you either holds or it doesn't. But that framing misses something important. Because the moment you stop chasing her is not the end of anything. It is actually the beginning of a process, a private, internal sequence that moves through her in stages, quietly, without announcement, and almost entirely out of your sight. And that is exactly why most men never understand what just happened. You were not there for it. Not because she hid it from you deliberately, but because this process lives inside her, in the way she notices things, in the questions she asks herself, in the feelings she does not name out loud. Most men either restart the chase before this process has a chance to run its course, or they disappear entirely and never learn what it produced. Either way, they walk away without the one piece of knowledge that would have changed everything. What is actually going through her mind the moment you stop chasing her? And why does it almost never match what you would expect? By the end of this video, you will know. Not in theory, in specific, observable, practical detail. The kind that changes how you read what is happening around you right now. She doesn't announce it. She doesn't text you. But she notices, usually within hours, sometimes sooner. And what she does with that awareness is where this gets interesting. Women are extraordinarily attuned to shifts in attention, not in a calculated way, not as a strategy, but in the same natural, almost automatic way that any social creature registers a change in its environment. When your energy was directed toward her consistently, that became part of the texture of her day. It was there. And then, at some point, it wasn't. That absence lands. It registers as clearly as a sound that suddenly stops in a quiet room. You notice the silence more than you ever notice the noise. This is important to understand because a lot of men operate under the assumption that if a woman wasn't actively responding to their pursuit, she must not have been paying attention to it. That assumption is almost always wrong. She was aware of your attention even when she wasn't reacting to it. She may not have been showing you that awareness, but it was there, running in the background, the way you are aware of background noise until the moment it stops. That is the moment most men walk away from without realizing it. What she does next is not reach for her phone. It is not compose a message she will then delete. What she does is notice, quietly, privately, that something has changed. And that noticing is not neutral. It carries weight. It opens a question. And that question is not the one you might expect her to be asking. But noticing is just the beginning, because what comes next isn't sadness or relief or anger. It's something quieter and more revealing than any of those. Here's what she doesn't do. She doesn't immediately wonder where you went. She wonders something else entirely. Something about herself and about you and about what any of this actually meant. The internal question that arrives for a woman when a man's pursuit stops is rarely, why did he stop? At least, not at first. The question that comes first is something closer to, was any of this real? Was he genuinely interested in me, or was he interested in the pursuit itself? And that question is not about you as much as it is about her own judgment. She is auditing her own read of the situation. She is going back through the record of what happened between you and looking for evidence, not to build a case against you, but to understand what she is actually dealing with. Psychologists describe this as a form of retrospective sense-making, the mind's natural drive to impose coherent meaning on events that feel suddenly incomplete. When something that had a clear direction suddenly stops moving, the brain wants to understand why, and it does that by reviewing what it already knows. What this means in practice is that she is replaying moments, not dramatically, not obsessively, but quietly, in the background of her day, she is reviewing the quality of your interactions, the consistency of your behavior, the moments where what you said matched what you did, and the moments where it didn't. Of course, context matters here. Women who had only casual contact with a man may move through this review very quickly, finding little to hold her attention. But when there was genuine connection, when conversations went somewhere real, when there was something that felt like mutual recognition, this review tends to go deeper. And what she finds in that review shapes everything that comes next. Here's what she doesn't do. She doesn't immediately wonder where you went. She wonders something else entirely. Something about herself and about you and about what any of this actually meant. What she's looking for, whether she names it or not, is authenticity. She is asking her own memory. Was he showing up as himself or was he performing? Because if she decides the pursuit was performance, that you were chasing the idea of her rather than actually responding to who she is, that conclusion closes the door. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way a chapter ends. But if what she finds in that review is evidence of genuine interest, moments that felt specific to her, conversations that went somewhere real, behavior that was consistent rather than spiked, something else starts to happen. And that brings us to the feeling she won't name and what it actually signals. Most men expect one of two things, that she'll be relieved or that she'll reach out. But what actually arrives for her is neither. It's something she probably won't even label correctly when it happens. The emotional experience that moves through a woman after the self-audit is not one that fits neatly into the categories we usually use. It is not longing, though it can feel adjacent to longing. It is not regret, though it carries some of that quality. The most accurate description is unsettledness, a low-level, persistent sense that something is incomplete, that a question has been raised that does not yet have an answer. And here's why that feeling exists, because this part is important. Human beings, and women are no exception to this, have what researchers call a completion drive, a deeply embedded need for resolution on things that have been left open. When your pursuit was active, there was a story in motion. There was a direction. When it stopped, that story did not resolve. It simply paused. And incomplete stories do not leave us neutral. They occupy cognitive and emotional space in a way that completed stories do not. This is the same psychological mechanism that makes you remember interrupted tasks more vividly than finished ones. She is not manufacturing drama. She is not playing a game. She is experiencing a genuine, biologically grounded response to incompleteness. And that response keeps you present in her awareness in a way that your continued pursuit never could have. Now, you might be thinking, doesn't this apply to anyone who stops something? And yes, in a limited sense it does. But here is what makes this specific. The unsettledness she feels is not generic. It is attached to you, to the specific texture of what was between you. And that attachment is meaningful information, both for her and for you. That is not indifference in disguise. That is the beginning of something real. What she does with that feeling, the choice she makes about it, often without realizing she's making a choice, is where her behavior starts to become readable. Here's where it splits. Because not every woman takes the same road from this point, and the road she takes tells you almost everything you need to know about where things actually stand. After the unsettledness arrives, two paths become available to her. And she does not consciously choose between them. She drifts toward one or the other based on something that was established long before you stopped chasing. The first path, she rationalizes. She takes the unsettled feeling and she assigns it an explanation that protects her. She tells herself she was never that interested. She tells herself this confirms what she suspected, that he wasn't serious. She files the experience under a familiar category and moves on. This path does not mean the feeling wasn't real. It means she found it easier to explain it away than to sit with what it might actually mean. The second path, the feeling grows. Instead of resolving, the unsettledness deepens into something closer to genuine curiosity. She begins to think about you differently, not less, but more, with more attention, more specificity, more interest. The withdrawal, rather than closing things down, has opened something. Here is the variable that determines which path she takes, and this is the part that most men miss entirely. It is not how dramatically you withdrew. It is not how long you've been absent. It is the quality of what existed before you step back. If what was between you was primarily composed of your effort, your messages, your pursuit, your initiation, then your absence removes almost everything that made up the interaction. There is nothing left for her to miss except the attention itself. And missing attention without an attached person is not the same thing as missing you. But if what was between you contained real moments, real conversation, real presence, real connection where she felt genuinely seen, then your absence removes the one layer that was covering something worth uncovering. And that is when she moves to path 2. Withdrawing pursuit does not create attraction where none existed. It reveals attraction that was already there, waiting beneath the noise. Remember what I told you at the start? That there was a process moving through her that you almost certainly couldn't see? We are in the middle of it now. And the next layer is the one that even she may not fully understand about herself. There's something happening beneath the surface of all this that even she may not be fully conscious of. She's not just thinking about you. She's listening to what her own silence is telling her. One of the most underexamined aspects of this entire psychology is the way that a woman uses the period of your absence to gather information about herself. Not about you, about herself. When your pursuit was constant, her response to you was being continuously shaped by external input. Your messages arrived and she responded. Your energy was present and she was orienting to it, one way or another. That constant input made it very difficult for her to hear her own signal clearly. Was what she felt when you reached out genuine interest, or simply the natural warmth that comes from being wanted? Was the pleasure she took in your company specific to you, or was it the general pleasure of connection? She may not have been able to answer those questions while the pursuit was in motion, but in the silence, those questions get a chance to surface. This is what researchers who study attachment behavior describe as differentiation, the process of separating genuine desire from conditioned response. In plain terms, she is learning whether she actually wants you or whether she simply enjoyed being wanted. And this distinction matters enormously. Because if what she discovers in the silence is that she misses you, not the attention, not the validation, but specifically you, then something real has been confirmed. Not performed, not decided, discovered. Of course, not every woman goes through this consciously. Most women would not describe their experience this way. They would say only that they found themselves thinking about you, that something felt unfinished, that they weren't entirely sure why you kept coming to mind. That is the self-observation producing its answer. She just doesn't always have the language for what she's actually learning. And when that self-observation produces an answer, when she actually hears what her own quiet is saying, it tends to arrive in one very specific form that most men either miss entirely or completely misread. When everything she's been processing finally reaches a conclusion, when her own silence has given her the answer, she will usually tell you, just not in any way you've been taught to look for. This is the signal that most men miss. And missing it is understandable because it does not look like a signal. It looks like almost nothing. It will not arrive as a confession. It will not arrive as a clear invitation. What arrives is something small, deniable, and low risk. A story view that she held for the full duration rather than skipping. A reply to something you said weeks ago, casual in tone but unprompted in timing. A question she sends that has no practical purpose, something she could have easily found the answer to on her own, but chose to ask you instead. A comment on something old in your history together, framed lightly, as if she simply happened to think of it. These are not accidents. They are not random. They are her way of testing the temperature of the water without fully committing to the dive. Here is why the signal is always small. Women, particularly women who have been through enough to understand the cost of misreading a situation, have a finely developed sense of risk management when it comes to emotional exposure. Sending a small, deniable signal allows her to extend an opening without placing herself fully in the position of having extended it. If you respond in a way that confirms her read, warmly, without urgency, without pouncing, the opening widens. If you don't, She can file this small gesture under something ordinary and nothing has been lost. This is not manipulation. This is calibration. Now, there is something that kills this signal before it ever arrives, and it is the most common mistake men make in this window. They restart the chase too soon. They feel the discomfort of the silence and they move to fill it. A message, a reach out, something to break the quiet. And the moment they do, her internal process stops. She no longer needs to listen to what her silence is telling her because the silence is gone. The incompleteness resolves, not through her own discovery, but through your return, and the dynamic resets to exactly where it was before. You have to let the process run. The small, quiet signal is the evidence that it has. It is her telling you, in the only language that feels safe to use at this stage, that what she found when she listened to herself was something that pointed toward you. That is the moment most men have been misreading as disinterest. It is almost never disinterest. It is almost always the opposite, expressed in the only way that felt possible. What you now understand, having watched this full process unfold, is something genuinely rare. Most men never see the sequence. They see only her surface behavior, the lack of response, the quiet, the absence of drama, and they read it as the story. But the story was never on the surface. The story was in what she noticed, and what she asked herself, and what she felt without naming, and which road she took from that feeling, and what she discovered when she listened to her own silence, and how she finally chose to reach back across the distance in the only way that felt safe. She noticed your absence before she processed it. She audited what was real before she felt anything. She felt something she couldn't name before she chose a direction. She listened to herself before she sent you any signal at all. Understanding that sequence does not give you control over the outcome, but it gives you something more valuable: clarity. The ability to read what is actually happening instead of reacting to what you fear might be happening. The ability to hold the silence without filling it prematurely. The ability to recognize her signal when it arrives because you now know what it looks like and why it was made small. You do not need to overanalyze every interaction from this point forward. What you need is simply the awareness that her silence is not empty. It is a process. And that process, when it runs its full course, tells you more about where things genuinely stand than anything she could have said while you were still chasing. Has a woman ever sent you one of those small, quiet signals after you stepped back? Something easy to miss? Tell me what it was in the comments. I read every one. If this kind of content resonates, the real psychology behind female behavior explained from the inside without the tactics or the performance, then subscribe. That is what this channel is built around. Not advice, understanding. In the next video, I'm going to show you the specific window of time when she's most likely to reach out after you stop chasing, because timing matters more than most men realize, and missing that window is one of the most common mistakes I see.